All right, and we're live. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into this edition of No Capes. I am here today with Christopher Pitt, also known as Assert Chris on Twitter. Say hi, Chris.
Hi.
For anyone who doesn't know you, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. I'm currently living in New Zealand, came from South Africa, and working for a company called Silverstrap. And there I work on open source stuff around the CMS and the framework that they've got. Um, I do a lot of fun, like weird code projects and talks and stuff. It's sort of fun. And write a bit. I enjoy writing. I'm married. I've got 2 kids, a little boy and a little girl, and they're very loud and jumpy on people all the time. Yeah. What else is there? Yeah, that's me.
Loud and jumpy children. I think that's kind of their MO in general. Um, so you and I were just talking about this before we went live, but I thought it was pretty interesting. So we'll talk about it again. How long have you been been a programmer?
I started developing when I left school, graduated from high school. So I don't know, that's like more than 10 years now, I guess. 11 or 12, something like that. And yeah, I started with ASP Classic because I was working for the first place that I got a job. They made these CMSs and websites, and their CMS was very copy and paste, and it was in ASP Classic, which is Visual Basic plus a bit of web infrastructure, and for connecting to Microsoft Access databases, which is amazing. So all sorts of file locking um, and resource intensive stuff, trying to work with that.
And so you started with ASP,
Yes.
doing the CMSE stuff. How did you get into PHP?
I after that ASP stuff, I wanted to learn C Sharp and work with ASP.NET a bit, and that's how I got into PHP. I didn't have a lot of fun doing .NET. I like the language C Sharp, but the infrastructure at the time wasn't great. So I was going on a trip with some friends and took a teach yourself PHP book along and learned it a bit on the way back and carried on with it from then. You've gone quiet.
What? Muting for the win. Um, so you taught yourself PHP on a trip out of a book.
Yes. Yes.
I find this pretty interesting because personally, for me, you're probably one of the smartest guys I know in general, but definitely smartest
Oh, thank
PHP
you.
guys that I know. So the idea that you learned all this stuff out of a book on a trip is pretty.
Well, it was probably more than just. It was probably more than the book. Like it's a lot of time as well, right? We don't start knowing
Cool.
everything.
Right.
Um,
Uh,
yeah.
so what made you stay with PHP then? You just really liked it, or did you fall into any certain community that we have in PHP, or?
Um, I don't know. I think I wasn't really part of PHP is the first programming community I've been involved in, but I wasn't really part of it until 2 or 3 years ago. Before that, it was just um, I was just there's a term called the goes to codes by an article by I can't remember the author's name, but if you Google it, the goes to codes, you'll see what I'm talking about. And it talks about this programmer who or the type of programmer who just consumes from the internet. So goes and gets info from Stack Overflow, Googles every problem, doesn't um, produce anything or give anything to a community. And that's kind of how I was for most of my programming. Um, and yeah, I think it was just the infrastructure that you need to host PHP stuff is really, really basic and easy to set up and free. So I think that was maybe the reason I stayed in it for most of the time. But these days, the reason I stay in it is for the community.
So if you've been programming for, a dozen years now, and you've only been in the community in the last 3 or so years, what changed that brought you in? What made you want to stop being the ghost who codes?
Uh, Raphael Domes, I guess. While I was working for this web agency in Cape Town, the latest one, just before I moved to New Zealand, he tweeted because he saw that the agency was talking a lot about PHP, and for some reason he was following them on Twitter or saw something they said on Twitter. So he tweeted about maybe starting up a Cape Town meetup group because he'd always wanted to. And I started it just on meetup.com as like I don't know, it was the first and one of the most awesome things I volunteered to do, I think, because it started the ball rolling for me. And so he tweeted about starting this thing, and I started the group, and it fizzled out almost immediately. I think the first meetup I had scheduled for it was to do an interview with Taylor Otwell, and I mistimed it completely. So I mailed Mr. Otwell about speaking at the meetup group, and he was totally cool with it and agreed and everything. And then I just didn't communicate well enough, like when it was supposed to be on. So I was going to do this big virtual hangout because I didn't really have a venue or catering or anything, and invited a bunch of people to it on Twitter and that work with me and that kind of thing, and started it and just waited and waited and waited, and yeah, it wasn't a great night for me. And after that, it was kind of difficult for me to get the courage to do something again, like a meetup-y thing. And I probably should have started a lot smaller than trying to do that first time, because apparently it only works for the pros like you. And so that kind of fizzled out. And then another guy in Cape Town took over the meetup group, a guy named Theo Sauls. And he is not a programmer, but he owns a company in Cape Town and employs like a couple of PHP folks. And he carried on with it and organized the first couple of meetups from it, and went on to organize a conference for PHP. Like, this guy who is not a programmer and doesn't know code or anything just ended up being the perfect person to start PHP South Africa, and got some awesome speakers to come around the first year and the second year and the third year. But that kind of got me, when he took over the group, that kind of got me excited about attending my first meetup. And that was my first meetup that I went to, was with that PHP meetup group. And after that, I don't know, I just started writing stuff and trying to release open source code. And the first few things I wrote were about Laravel, because we were using it a lot at the time at the place I worked. And I think I wrote an article about it, about authentication or something. And the main Laravel account retweeted it, and it just went crazy. Like, that first really big thing I wrote went overnight, was like more views than I'd ever seen on anything I'd produced combined. And after that, I just carried on writing stuff. It was kind of like a snowball effect, but it started off with Raphael asking about someone to start a meetup group.
I am always very impressed by how often Raphael gets mentioned on this podcast. He's obviously
He's a cool guy.
He's a very cool guy, and he's helped a lot of people. And it's usually when I ask questions like, "How did you get involved with the community?" or "How did you get your start?" and more than a couple times it's been because of him. So
yeah.
It's late where he is. He's probably sleeping, but if he watches this later, thanks, man.
Yeah. I actually only met him for the first time like a month ago. Before that, it's just been Twitter, and that's it.
Yeah,
he's
he's
yeah,
a really
he's
cool
really
guy.
nice.
We've hung out a couple times. But yeah, he's also fun on Twitter.
Mm.
Um,
Unless you get dependency versions wrong, dev master and so forth.
we just won't talk about the DOMs cracking. Anywho, so do you remember what you said the first thing that you released, first open source code you released? What was that?
Uh, I don't remember. I'll head to GitHub and see if I can figure it out. But I don't know. It was probably something related to like some example code of what I was writing about at the time. Ooh, I didn't want to click on that.
Some of my favorite stuff that you do is the writing that you do on Medium. You um, you do really cool series, which I don't think a lot of people do. Um,
I'm good at starting a lot of really cool series. I'm not good at finishing them. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, I will occasionally, be interested in something, and then I'll write like a one-off blog post, and that's about as much um, commitment as I have to a thing. And you've done a couple multi-part series um, on, I think you did one on making languages, and then one on Minecraft,
Mm.
um, and also rebuilding Laravel, I think you did. And I learned just recently, right before we got on air, that you did rebuilding Moo tools also.
Yes, so I was gonna say I remember the first code I open sourced, and it was long before I started writing. I don't know, didn't feel that great about it at the time to remember it. But I used to do a lot of JavaScript code. I remember now, and sort of the first project I was involved with was MooTools, and I wrote quite a bit of code for that. And I still have some repos on GitHub about this MooTools code, which is interesting. Yeah. And for a long time, Mootools was very much on the decline. Like all the developers basically got hired by Mozilla and Facebook, and a significant amount of them, the core developers of Mootools, and a significant amount of them are now working on React.js. So they just ran out of time, I guess, to work on Mootools itself. And yeah, so that Mootool series was just, I don't know, dissecting it and figuring out ways to use some of this good stuff in it to do other things.
Yeah, I find it fascinating, the whole idea of, I think you actually released the Laravel series as a book through LeanPub, and it's essentially exactly what it said it is. You're rebuilding Laravel by taking it apart. Is
Yeah,
that about right?
yeah. I started that last year, and actually it was one of the more read stuff that I've written, and kind of took a break towards when 5.0 was being released because a lot of the internal stuff changed. Um, and I've been toying with the idea of actually doing a live code step through of what it does, because it's essentially stepping through, right? Like the whole series just starts off by looking at what an address in a browser actually does. Goes through htaccess and then starts like constructing a request and bootstrapping the whole framework. So it's weird, like it's a different kind of writing to all the other stuff. It's not really tutorial, it's more like dissection. And I've been toying with the idea of maybe doing like a live stream of stepping through the 5.0 stuff and the 5.1 stuff, I guess. But I've yet to find time to do that.
Finding time is always the hardest part.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, no, I think it's an amazing way to understand something and to see how it works is, to step through it like that, to dissect it and deconstruct it and kind of poke it with a stick and see what makes it tick. I think the Rebuilding Laravel series might have been actually the first of your blog posts that I read. And then you and I kind of started talking after that, I think. I may not be mistaken on that, but it's very fascinating reading. Um, and you also do quite a bit of speaking, also, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. As of
So
recently, like as recent as being part of a community, it's not it's not really a long running thing. I'm a very new speaker.
so do you remember when you started speaking? Sometime in the last 2 or 3 years.
Yep. The first time I started speaking was at the first PHP South Africa, um, and Rasmus was there. I mean, like I have this weird thing going where I speak. I have spoken at a few first-time conferences at places like first PHP South Africa and the first PHP New Zealand, and for some reason that's like a popular time to get Rasmus to speak at a conference. So I've been at like 4 or 5 conferences starting out at places with Rasmus. Um, like I've been at more conferences with Rasmus than with Art, which is like an interesting thing. Yeah, the PHP South Africa was the first time.
Do you remember the talk that you gave?
Um, I bizarrely gave a keynote there, and it was like the first talk of the conference, and there were all these tech issues, and it was nerve-wracking at the time. But it was about looking forward towards the future of PHP and us as developers taking an active role in its evolution. Yeah, it was about that. I don't think it was very good. It obviously wasn't very good because it was the first talk I ever gave. But yeah.
So was this the first conference you'd ever attended, or had you been at other conferences?
PHP South Africa was the first conference I ever attended. Yeah.
So the first conference you've ever attended, the
Yes.
first time you've ever given a talk, you were
Yes.
giving the opening keynote
Yes.
about the future of PHP in front
Yes.
of the creator of PHP.
Yes.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. Like that's amazing.
It,
I'm wowed. That's
it was. It wasn't. I mean, it was. I was so nervous, and we hadn't worked out like a lot of the technical stuff. It was the conference was held in an office space in Cape Town, and quite a nice big office space at one of the bigger agencies there. And it wasn't rigged to do any kind of sound stuff, so we had to bring in, well, the organizers, I guess, brought in all the mic equipment and sound equipment and stuff. And so it wasn't really set up. Like, it was Theo's first conference he was organizing, and it was my first talk. So the first 10 minutes of it was just like, can everyone hear me? Hello, is this thing on? Oh no, that's gone off. This cable's loose. It was pretty thug at the time, actually.
so what was your process preparing for that talk?
Um, I just I just wrote the whole thing out. I didn't really at that stage know what I was doing. Actually, I didn't have um, know what to do and what not to do, what to do and what not to do. Talk and of preparing it and of practicing it and make sure that it doesn't suck. I may as well write out what I'm going to say, and what I did. Short as well, um, which is another thing. Like, you don't realize it when you don't do it a lot, but when you get nervous, you start speaking really, really, really quickly, and then you got to say everything you got to say before the time runs out, and then you long before the end. Or and Oh no.
Oh, sorry, my connection cut out a little bit. Thank you, Brooklyn Wi-Fi. Um, can you hear me now?
Although I've stopped being able to hear you. Hi.
Hey, yay, it's working. Okay, sorry about that. Optimum
No
service
problem.
really sucks. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Um, so yeah, you cut out a bit there, but you were talking about time management and talking too quickly. So on that first talk, did you run short?
I did.
Yeah. How did you recover from that? Did you just do like a lengthier, well, I guess for keynotes, you don't really do a Q&A.
Yeah,
So,
not really. Not really. I mean, there were some questions because I did reference like I guess some code stuff during that talk. Because it was about developers being involved in the future and the future of PHP, the language, and how it was changing. So like there was some fun stuff. At that time, there were already a few RFCs for doing stuff like static typing. Um, so there were some code examples during the talk and questions afterwards. But it was also it wasn't too much of a technical talk, so I could ramble a little bit, I guess, and not be super boring.
do you have you changed your process since then? Like,
Yes.
was it a good learning experience for you, I guess, that you don't run short in the future? Um,
Yes. Yeah, it was part of it's just practicing more and making sure that the content is enough to fill the full time space. And part of it is also just not speaking too quickly. So like everyone's nervous all the time, even people who speak a lot. And I get super, super, super nervous. But if you rehearse it a lot beforehand, then you kind of get muscle memory, or your brain gets muscle memory for what you're going to say. And you can just kind of relax more, not be so nervous.
so how many times do you run through a talk before you give it?
It depends on the talk. Like if it's something that I've spoken on before, then I don't need as much rehearsal beforehand. Then it's just brushing up on what's changed and making sure that it still fits within the right time frame. But if it's something I've never done before, I usually like ramp up the the stress factor of giving the talk. So a really good place to practice new talks that you don't know, practice delivering them to people. I mean, after rehearsing it yourself, a good way to practice delivering it to people is maybe giving a lightning talk on a topic that you want to give a longer talk on. And before then, you obviously practice those 10 minutes or 15 minutes over and over and over and over and over. But it also gives you a good idea of the kinds of questions people will ask, and whether the talk actually holds people's attention or not. Um, so a lot of the stuff that I do talk on I've already tried to give them as lightning talks on Nomad PHP, um, which Joe actually recommends, by the way. Like if you listen to the Nomad stuff, he's like, "Hey, you want to become a speaker? Then give a lightning talk." It's pretty cool. Um, yeah, so I'll usually try and um, I'll usually try and prepare a talk and practice it um, till I know it well. And depending on the talk and the content, maybe that's just doing it 5 times, maybe it's doing it 10 times. I don't know. But I'll start doing a lightning talk, and then I'll maybe escalate that to a 30-minute meetup group talk, and then I'll escalate that to like a normal conference length talk. And by that time, I know the topic well enough to be able to talk about it. and not get super stressed out.
So how do you come up with the ideas for your talks? You're back yet? Sorry.
Sorry about that.
Was that your connection or mine this time?
I think it was my browser, actually.
Oh.
I'm running El Capitan, and like the iOS betas on everything, and things are just so unstable at the moment. I think I changed browser tabs to Gmail and back, and it just cut the stream. Sorry about that.
That's okay. So how do you come up with your conference, with your talk ideas? Sorry, how do you come up with your talk ideas?
It's generally stuff that I'm doing at the time that's interesting to me. It's the same with writing blog posts. It's just that the conference talks are topics that I can talk for an hour about, whereas a lot of blog posts are just there's this really interesting thing you can do in 10 minutes, and that's really all there is to it. And I guess it kind of shows in like I do a lot of weird topics. A lot of them are just down the line asynchronous PHP stuff, but a lot of them are also like really out there, like the Minecraft stuff. Programming through Minecraft is a really weird topic for conferences, and no one's talking about it. It's pretty weird. And the Turing stuff is pretty interesting. I don't know. No, it's just generally things that I'm discovering while I'm coding or while I'm, working at the office or something. I'll be like, oh, that could be an interesting thing. And if there's enough of it, then it makes a good conference talk, I guess.
Do you have any advice or insight into how much is enough of it? Like, how did you calibrate that
Um,
scale for yourself?
that's a really interesting question. I don't know. I guess it depends on how much you can differentiate what you want to talk on from what's already out there. Like if you want to do a talk on test-driven development, there's already so much out there, and every conference has like one or two talks on testing and or test-driven development that you can't really say enough interesting stuff for a conference organizer to pick your talk if you're not already well known for that type of talk. I seem to be in this area where I have like enough experience about asynchronous PHP to be able to do that talk everywhere and everyone wants it. And to be able to branch off from that into like more subtle areas like generators or like I think I have four talks submitted to True North just in different areas of asynchronous PHP, because there's such a lot to talk about there. But I would be cautious about doing a testing talk because a lot of people are already well known for doing that kind of thing, and there's not a lot of new stuff I can bring to it. I guess just picking topics that are interesting and that aren't already overdone is a good way to find out if there's enough content to be able to do a talk. Like if no one's talking about Minecraft or no one's talking about historical people in PHP like Turing, then that's kind of fun and easy to be able to talk about. You can extrapolate enough on a person's life to be able to give a history talk about them. I don't know. Did that answer the question? It's an interesting question.
Yeah, I think it did. And I think the answer is really going to be that it varies for everyone.
Yes.
As far as what is enough to make a talk. But I wanted to hear your insight, and you gave me that. So, have you given the Minecraft talk? Do you have an actual talk on Minecraft?
I have, yes. I've given it on Nomad, and it went went well enough. I've given it at a meetup group as well, but I, I submit it to like every conference I try and speak at, and no one has wanted it yet. And I think it's going to be interesting the first time it does happen, because there's a lot going on there. Like the kinds of things you can do with it are fascinating, and the purpose of the talk is to be able to relate the concepts of programming and of electronic circuitry within the confines of a game. Like there's just enough in the game to be able to simulate that stuff. And I've been able to use it to do, like there are people who do absolutely insane stuff with Minecraft, people who build Commodore 64 emulators in Minecraft, and like actual computers that you can program with like Java running in a separate thread. Like there's this guy who made a Commodore 64 thing where it's a map, right? You open the game and you load this map up, and you're in first person and there's just blocks everywhere and whatever. But at the same time, you launch up a Java applet and you write program code in this programming language that he's invented for this, and hit a button and it transfers this stuff into memory of the map in the game and lets you run like dynamic software within a game, just like all worked out with game parts. And it's fascinating how people can do that kind of stuff. But you can also, because it's possible to translate concepts of logic programming and of circuitry design, you can do other interesting things as well. Like I just went to the Dutch PHP conference, and Silverstripe sponsored a booth there. And at this booth, we had 2 iMacs set up. And in the time leading up to the conference, I was able to make this really simple game, but of battleships. So the board game where it's like people open up a case and then they put some ships on, someone has to guess and think. It's basically a guessing game, right? I was able to tinker around with stuff in Minecraft to make a Minecraft map to simulate that kind of behavior. So 2 people play against each other and they're each in a raft, and the one person like picks some stuff and the other person guesses where those things are. And if they guess right, then there's like big explosions and stuff, and it's all fun. And doing that kind of thing is really fun, and would be really fun for kids who don't know how to program or do electronics or stuff, to be able to grasp those concepts in a medium that they're familiar with. Yeah, so I think it'll be interesting the first time that talk gets accepted. There'd be like a lot of fun stuff going on. I don't know. I guess I would try and demonstrate building some circuitry in this thing during the talk, because I love live demonstration of code. That'd be fun.
Is that sarcasm, or do you actually love it?
No, I really do. I really do. It's a lot of fun.
Has it ever gone poorly for you? I hear horror stories about live coding.
It kind of depends what you're trying to do. Again, it's another thing where you can rehearse the thing until you know it so well that there's very little that could go wrong. And there's other stuff that you do as well. Like you don't depend on network access, and you make sure that you have a backup of the code that you want to write, so that if the code that you are writing isn't working and you are so stressed that you can't figure out what's wrong, then you just change to the backup code. And usually that will show you what the problem is, but you know that works because you've tested it beforehand and you've rehearsed with it. So there's some tricks that you can do to get it to work better. But it's far more fun for the people watching when you're doing something live, as long as you're not doing something boring.
Yeah, we should all try to avoid boring talks.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned like the Turing like history talk. Have you given that one?
I haven't given it at a conference yet. I've given it again on Nomad PHP because they love me and are super gracious and let me speak there the whole time, and I love them for it. Yeah, I gave the Turing talk on Nomad as a lightning talk, and that's also pretty interesting because it's not a lot of people aren't doing a lot of talks about influential uh, influential STEM people in the history of computing. Like I think I've seen one talk at a conference that was about Ada Lovelace, and actually it was more about Charles Babbage than Ada Lovelace, but it was still pretty interesting because it was both of them. And um, yeah, so I've only seen one talk about that at Dutch PHP conference, um, but it's an interesting topic, I think. Um, there's a lot of cool, really cool history there, and a good story aside from the tech that you can do. And the version of the talk that I do about Turing also includes like some code, so code to describe the universal machine that he formulated, and code to describe how the Enigma machine worked, and unfortunately there wasn't enough time in the Nomad talk to do code to describe how he created the machine or how the machine worked that broke the Enigma code. But it's still interesting. Like there's code, and there's a good wartime story about this um, massively persecuted and brilliant person.
Yeah, Turing is fascinating. I've actually thought about blogging about similar stuff before because I'm really into the math, and I have several books about like founding fathers of math, and I forgive the book because it's from the I think 1850s or so. I buy a lot of antique math books.
Yeah,
I have a book from like the 1850s called Men of Mathematics,
I've seen
and
that book.
yeah, I forgive it for
Yeah,
being men only. But it's just fascinating stuff. I like to know the history of it because at the end of the day, people did this stuff, and
yeah,
I think the fullness of the person kind of does matter. Um,
yeah. But try and find books about influential women in engineering, in maths, in computing, and you won't. You won't ever. There's like this huge chasm where like all the amazing thing that women scientists have put into the history of mathematics and computers and science, that it's just like this amazing contribution that props up a lot of stuff, and the history and the stories about them just get chucked in this chasm. Like no one keeps a good history about these people. um I like I've I try and search for biographies about people in science, and particularly women in science, and it's quite difficult. And even just doing research for like little tiny snippets of blog posts about women in the history of computing is super difficult, because you have to rely on interviews done 20 years after they were at the prime of what they were contributing to all these things that we use now. And it's just like third hand accounts and interviews so long after the fact. And I guess maybe that's because a lot of historians were men, or just didn't care, or I don't know, weren't paying attention, I guess.
it is unfortunate. You can find some stuff, I think, on Wikipedia. I spend a lot of time reading through Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, it's definitely not like the in-depth kind of biography you would find in a book dedicated to them, but there's at least, an article on famous female mathematicians and scientists, and you can kind of extrapolate from there a little bit. And if ever I do write a blog series on the history of computering or whatever, the history of math, I would definitely do everything I could to include the amazing, powerful women that also helped to shape it. Um, but yeah, I find it interesting, and I find it pretty cool that I'm not the only person that likes this kind of stuff. So that's pretty awesome. Do you have a favorite talk that you've given?
Uh, um, yeah, I I kind of like the asynchronous talk, which is the talk that always gets accepted of those that I submit. Um, I like talks around that topic because I've done most of the most of the research work that I've done in the last sort of 3 or 4 years has been on asynchronous PHP. And the more it gets accepted for me to give the talk, the more research I do into it. So I know it very well out of like the different areas of things that I like experimenting with. I like that talk. It usually goes well, probably also because it's very practiced by now. I really like the talk on creating or implementing programming languages, which I've only given at one conference, but it was super fun when I gave it. Like, it's actually quite a fun topic. It's on converting from a language that you have to another language, so implementing a cross compiler or an interpreter, but in very simple steps and doable within the talk. So when I gave the talk, I introduced like a very small subset of a language and then built a cross compiler during the talk, demonstrating all the steps. And it's actually such a fun thing. And that's what made me start writing the series on making languages. Yeah, some people got really serious about building compilers and stuff, and said, no, that's not how compilers work and stuff. But which I'm fully like, I know a lot of stuff that goes into compilers is just mind-boggling magic and has to be to get such optimal performance and stuff. But the purpose, I guess, of the talk is that we shouldn't be limited by this fear that there are these magical areas of programming that we can't step into because there's so much requisite knowledge that we would never be able to do anything useful. Like, the talk shows that if you have this language that you want to implement, these are things you could do to get perhaps not the most optimal cross-compiler or interpreter, but one that works. So if you have this language you want to try to see, how it could function, how you would build an infrastructure around it, then you could implement that. And maybe someone after you comes and builds a V2 of the cross-compiler or the interpreter that does it in the magic black box way that compiler writers do these days and like to talk about. Yeah.
That's one of my favorite things about your writing, and sadly I've never seen one of your talks, but you write about things that could be considered complex or difficult, but you do it in a super approachable way.
Well, thank you.
So it's very unintimidating, because compilers, black boxes, it can be very intimidating. Like, I'm just not computer sciencey enough to understand these big concepts, to feel like that. And then,
man, there are so many things that feel hopelessly unable to grasp. Like the work, the kind of stuff that Anthony Ferrara does with things like RecCT are incredible, like, and very complex and difficult to understand. And sometimes I just look at the stuff and I'm like, well, okay, I'll put that on the shelf of things that I will get to after I've done a lot of research to be able to understand it. But all of this stuff, like the stuff that motivates people to talk, it's not that people who speak at conferences know a lot more. It's just that they've learned something and want to share it. And all of the stuff that I talk about and all of the stuff that I write about is just stuff that I'm discovering and may or may not know well enough. And people are going to point out mistakes with that, and that's how I will learn. But also, that I'm learning this stuff means that I can share what I'm learning, and other people can also learn from that. Yeah.
It's awesome. It's well done. You do a very good job at it. How did you get, you mentioned that, when you're submitting talks, it's a good idea to submit talks for things that you're kind of known for. How did you developed so much reputation, I guess, or influence with asynchronous PHP? How did you get started with that?
Um, I guess I spoke about it at a conference. My first conference was PHP South Africa, and they still, until this year, I guess, do 2 conferences a year, one in Cape Town and one in a city that's nearby to that. And so the first conference I spoke about, I had that interesting keynote experience, and then I also spoke about annotations. And then the second conference I spoke about asynchronous PHP, like 6 months after that. And there's a lot. I mean, there was already a lot to speak about before I even started, because there's a lot going on there, a lot of different libraries and extensions and methods to doing this stuff, which makes it kind of interesting because I could talk about quite a broad range of topics and not have to drill down too deeply into them. So I didn't have to understand the intricacies of how each of them work. And over time, continually researching it, I've been able to get a few more of those intricacies, but I still don't need to speak about them because there's so much going on in the area. I guess just speaking about it a lot. It's conference organizers seem to be happier to accept talks that you've given before, especially when there are videos of you giving them and you have slide decks of you giving them and there is joined in feedback of you giving them. Then it's a bit of a safety blanket for organizers to know what they're getting into. And some library will go out of fashion and some new thing will happen. So the talk itself does change, but generally the concept is pretty much stays the same. PHP doesn't evolve quick enough as a language to put that talk out of commission.
I guess that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Let's talk about abstracts a little bit. So you're
Okay.
talking about getting, accepted to a conference, not a concert, conference. And then,
Accepted to a concert would be cool though.
right? And we could all be rock stars.
Yeah.
So the first step in that is obviously submitting to a CFP, which requires an abstract. So how do you go about writing your abstracts? Do you have a tried and true method, or are they all different?
I don't really. They're all different. Like the touring one, for instance, is massive, and I need to cut it down. Whereas other ones are just a paragraph, and I need to lengthen them out. I don't really have a method for doing that, but it's generally telling if you can't think of 2 paragraphs about what's good about a talk, that maybe you don't understand the topic well enough yet, or need to formulate more of your ideas on what the talk is. I don't know. I just write about what I want to talk about, and get it wrong all the time. Like for every abstract that I do submit somewhere, there are 3 abstracts that just get binned. I have this ever-growing list of markdown files with abstracts and summaries and stuff.
So how many talks do you normally submit to a conference?
I've got about 7 or 8 in a rotating list that I've got now, and generally, if I've given the talk as a lightning talk or at a meetup group, and I like it still, then that goes into the list. But sometimes talks just go into the list because I think they're really interesting ideas at the time. Like there's this one that I've submitted about to True North about all the async talks that I've got submitted there. This one about distributed event emitters, and yeah, it's fun. Like it's another async talk, but it's looks at doing stuff like message queue based workers and communication between them and the main thread, and how to build that into like a practical application. Yeah.
So back before my connection got a little fuzzy again, we were talking about how you got into speaking about async PHP. How did you
Yes.
get into actually using it? Where did that come from?
I don't know. I probably wanted to do sockets at some point, and whenever it comes to doing like weird stuff in a language, there are always two sides, and the one will say, yeah, go for it, these are all the things you can do, and the other side will say, no, don't use this language, use this other language. So for PHP and async, everyone's always just like, well, just use Node. And on the one hand, it's good to use like the right tool for the job, and if Node is that right tool, then use it. But it's actually such a dumb argument to just jump to a different language every time you want to do something different, because that means that any kind of growth in the ecosystem of PHP with asynchronous stuff just stalls, because everyone's just like, okay, well, forget about ever doing it in PHP, let's do it in another language. I probably wanted to do sockets at some point and tried and failed miserably, and then stumbled on like React PHP, I guess, or like one of the many different ways of doing that stuff that's already available in PHP. So that's probably how. Yeah, it's also a very underdeveloped area of PHP. So there's not, as a community, we just haven't learned all the cool ways that we could be exploiting this stuff. So it's hard to find a post or a talk on asynchronous PHP that doesn't hint at building a chat application, because everyone's just like, sockets, you must want to build a chat application. But there are many really interesting ways that you can use this stuff, that aren't critical to the point where you have to use Node. You can just use PHP to do a lot of asynchronous stuff.
Do you have, so in all of your blog post writing, have you written posts or a series on asynchronous PHP?
I haven't. That's the one thing I've hardly written about, which is kind of interesting.
Right. It's the thing you always talk about, but you haven't written about.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
I've wanted to actually write a book about it, but to involve people who are already doing a lot of it. So yeah, just trying to remember all the people. I've actually spoken to like 4 or 5 different people who are in different areas of doing asynchronous code, about getting together and writing something on that. And maybe that'll work out if I find the time to do it and people have time and are willing. But yeah, I haven't really written a lot about it in blog posts.
So that's actually something that I know next to nothing about. I've never really played with asynchronous PHP, but I wanted to. So do you have, for myself and others such as myself, do you have resources that you would point us to?
Um,
Maybe people who have written about it?
yes. So Casey Kivit or Wari Haximus, I think he's on Twitter. I'll put a link in the chat there. But he has written a really good series on using React. Did I spell it right? Yes, I did. Okay. So I met this guy for the first time, the same time I met Raphael, and he is such a nice guy, and he is so tall. Oh my gosh, I feel like a gnome next to him.
He's very tall.
He has written a really good post series about building stuff in React, so that's worth a read. I actually have a lot of places you can look about this in the latest slide deck that I have for async PHP. So I'll put that in chat as well. There's a lot of this is the last slide deck that I put together for this talk, and there are a lot of links in here to like different aspects of this stuff, as well as um, code examples of how some of this stuff works.
I always love you have great visuals in all of your slides and I've never seen your slides obviously, but in your blog posts, you usually do great visuals. So
Thanks
well
for
done
some of
there.
them. Thanks.
Yeah.
I haven't been doing a lot of imagery with them until recently, because it's kind of like that's just a whole nother time sink, is finding good visuals that you're able to use with licensing, and so it's not always easy. But yeah. Yay.
Oh, there we go. Back again. Do you have any
Hi.
tips or tricks for finding good visuals for blog posts? Yeah.
Creative Commons search on Flickr is a good go-to. Generally, asking people is also useful. So recently, I needed to use a photo of some PHP person. I can't remember who. um, and like there are a lot of albums like Anthony Ferrara also does a lot of photos about PHP people. So generally, if you know or can get hold of the people, then asking them is useful. But otherwise, just Creative Commons on Flickr.
Cool.
It's a really easy, like if you set those search terms up, it's really easy to know that every image you look at that you could potentially want to use is already covered in Creative Commons or share alike, and you can use it without worrying about who owns it and whether they'll mind.
I will do that. I thought Google Image had a Creative Commons search too, but I could be wrong.
I haven't seen it, but if it does, that would be pretty awesome.
Yeah, I'm probably wrong. I'm wrong a lot, but Flickr for sure. Um, okay, so we're about out of time. What's the most interesting thing you've learned recently?
In the last 2 weeks, I've spent. It's just going to be about code. Obviously, it's going to be about code. In the last 2 weeks, I've been able to spend quite a bit of time working on process splitting, like looking at a lot of alternatives to doing multi-process stuff and multi-threaded stuff. So there's like a super fun library that I've been working on, and actually, this GitHub repo is a nice place for all of the async code I write. Is there? Here. So there's this really fun project in there called Doorman, which I've been working on, and it's the README should show sort of generally what it's about, but basically it's a process manager that spawns child processes off and then listens to them, listens for termination events, and allows you to do stuff like scaling rules, like how many processes of a type can run and whether they can run if there is like 50 to 75% CPU usage used and that kind of stuff. Like there's a lot of cool stuff going on there, and that's going into a Silverstripe module, which does queue job processing. So a worker that's attached to a message queue so that the CMS can send tasks off to be done later. This library I'm making to go in the core of that so that we can have better control over, so that users of the CMS can say, okay, when I make this task to re-index searching, that it should stop all previous re-indexes that are currently happening and start again, or this task that I make to generate a report, I can run 2 of them at the same time, but only if there is less than 50% of my memory in use. So yeah, that's been really fun to work on, and with an interesting constraint of having to work in PHP 5.3.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
That,
yeah. So yeah, there's a lot already that would make this a lot easier. Like being able to use React PHP's child process stuff would be interesting, but that's 5.4 and above only. And there's so much really cool stuff that you could do with generators in this area for like the cooperative aspects of this, and that's 5.5 only. So it's been interesting learning about what I can and can't do in 5.3 and trying to write something usable in that.
so I'm interested why you're doing it in 5.3?
The library, the Q job processing library that I want to um, embed this thing into is supports 5.3 and above, and we want to make it a minor version update to upgrade to this new stuff. So
Ah,
yeah,
okay. Well, I mean, that's a fun challenge, at least. It's a nice sandbox to be put into and have to find a solution for it.
it's less about us wanting to support 5.3 as like a whole CMS and framework, um, but a lot of the people that already host Silver Stripe stuff are hosting it on versions of Red Hat that only ship with a stable, secure 5.3. And to get a later version, they need to use unsupported repositories to pull down high versions of PHP. So
Mm.
it's basically just to cater for people who are still on legacy systems.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. I know a lot of people still support 5.3.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean it sucks to support it because of its end of life and stuff, but there's encouraging people to use secure stuff, and there's mandating it, and it's not good for adoption of anything um to make people feel bad for what they have to run anyway.
right,
For stuff
right. You
like
can't.
for stuff like government infrastructure or like big telcos or stuff, they just don't have the agility to update systems to later versions, and well, what you going to do?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's interesting. When you think about programming challenges, you don't often think about, at least I don't often think about, just the inherent challenge in trying to put a feature in I don't know, a limited box like that. So,
Mm,
and it's got to be like doubly hard because before we had generators, before we had, all the 5.4, 5.5, 5.6 features, the task that you're doing probably would have been just as difficult. But now
yes,
that you know those things exist and
yeah,
they're like right over there, you could touch them if you wanted to. That's got to make it harder, I think.
yeah. I mean, it's kind of good to understand what's core about the language, like what parts of it haven't changed that are still really cool. Um, yeah, it's a fun challenge.
Yeah, I would read about that, by the way, if you ever had time to write about it. I'd
Oh,
read about
cool.
it. Okay, so we're about 4 minutes over. Do you have anything else for the good of the cause?
Nope.
Parting words? No? Okay. Thank you very much for coming on. It's been an absolute joy. You are truly one of my favorite people, and it was
Oh,
so
thank
great to
you.
have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yep, enjoy. I will talk to you soon on the Twitter. Thanks, everybody, for watching.